All right, you guys are in for a real treat today because I'm going to let my webcam do the work for me today so you know how much hillbilly I am. So everybody that's ever been to one of my classes probably done know that I hate oversized equipment. It's the biggest problem we have in the industry. And I'm sure y'all agree with me. And let's get on started here with this presentation. So everything we have in the United States is big. We like big everything. We got big Texas, we got big flags, we got big trucks. If you look at the Ford lineup of trucks, you got the F-150, the 250, 350, 450. I don't even know why there's a 450. What is that even for? Who the hell needs a 450? My wife used to work for Ford, and her cousins would always call up for discounts and stuff. And then one day I remember one cousin saying, we need a 650. I didn't even know there was a 650. But guess what? There's a Ford F-650. I don't know what he uses it for. I don't know what he's pulling. Buildings, houses. I'm not sure. But they got it. And when I was making this presentation for y'all, I looked it up and tried to find some pictures. And I found out there was a 750. Who even knew about that? Ford F-750. Well, guess what happens if you Google 850, 950, 1050? What are people doing with these big trucks? What can't a 150 do? Everything got to be big here. Everything. Even my own family. We had a minivan for 13 years. 13 years. Finally got a new van. This is what we get. I don't know why we need a 12-passenger van. We got a 12-passenger van. I only got 4 kids. Probably double what most of you got, but 4 kids, we got a 12-passenger van. We could fit the whole entire girls' basketball team in there. Plenty of space. I don't even get it. I don't know why we had to get that. The wife said we got to get it, so we got to get it. What do you want me to do? Right? Bigger, better. Bigger's always better. Always more French fries, more cheeseburger. How many of y'all seen that new 110-inch TV? You know you want that. And even if you can't afford that, you're still going to get the 90-inch TV. Who needs a 110-inch TV? What room are you even going to put it in? Doesn't make no sense. Cell phones, bigger, bigger, bigger. They'd keep getting bigger if y'all got bigger pockets. I'm sure they'd do it. No doubt about it. We just need more power, like my man Tim says. More power. Bigger is better. And guess what? For houses, yep, we need bigger air conditioners too. Bigger's better. Bigger's always better. If you're selling air conditioners. But obviously, we sell air conditioners here at TEC, and we don't really want you to have a bigger air conditioner. That's ridiculous, right? So what we'd really rather see is things be properly sized. What's properly sized mean? And why does that even freaking matter? There's lots of reasons it matters. First reason being mold. Mold thrives in high humidity. Okay, what the heck does that have to do with anything, Ryan? Who cares about high humidity? All right? Well, high humidity is often caused by, guess, oversized equipment. But you knew I was going to say that because you saw the title of the email, right? Oversized equipment can cause high levels of humidity, which can cause mold. Now, the mold in this picture, that wasn't caused by humidity. Some of you that are savvy enough and do enough home performance stuff realize that the high humidity in this particular case is, you can see it on the back side of that picture, it's kind of angled downward on the back wall there. There was probably either a roof leak, very likely, or a piping leak in the roof, which is less likely. But there was some kind of moisture being generated up there that was leaking onto the ceiling and finding its way draining on the backside there. If it was humidity that was causing the mold, then there'd be mold in more places than just up there on the ceiling. So how much is too high? 65% is the ASHRAE 62 recommendation for the maximum humidity in a space. Absolute maximum. You shouldn't have more than 65% in the space. That's ASHRAE 62, which is the IAQ standard. The EPA has their own standards, and the EPA says you need to keep the humidity between 30 and 60%. So 60 is the max in that case. By the way, ASHRAE 62 does not have a lower end humidity. It's just the high end for indoor air quality purposes. But EPA would like to see it between 30 and 60. All right. ASHRAE 55, for you guys that are familiar with that standard. ASHRAE 55 is the human thermal comfort standard. They specify a maximum of 60% also. Don't ask me why one ASHRAE standard says 65 and another says 60, other than the fact that one is related to mold growth and the other one is related to human comfort. But as far as I'm concerned, 60, 65, that's about the same thing. So I normally tell people keep it below 60. And when I design a system or when I design a control system for a system, I try to keep it below 55% humidity. Usually because there's going to be a little bit of hysteresis in my control, so I might turn on the dehumidification functionality at 60%, drive it down to 55, let it drift back up to 60, drive it down to 55. But we need to keep these humidities in check in order for bad things to not happen. And more recently, if you've been following along with all the studies out there, talking about various virus growth and bacteria growth and mold growth, keeping things between 30 and 60%, or some of the studies I've even seen lately have said between 35 and 50% is the most optimal scenario for the least amount of bad things to happen. And as you can see on this chart here, and this chart's been around forever, and there's newer versions of it, but it's still the same information. It's just fancier colors than what I have. If you keep things between that 35 and 50%, you're going to be in pretty good shape. A lot of things don't thrive in that area. Especially when you get above 40%, it's bad for the viruses. So like that 50% is kind of that magical number for all bad things to stop happening. So what are we going to do in order to keep this mold growth in check here? As well as keep viruses in check and keep people comfortable. So the first place we're going to look over to is the code system. As you know, most of you guys are from Illinois, and there's some guys from Wisconsin, Indiana I saw on there, Michigan I saw on the list, a couple other states in the Midwest as well. Even someone from North Carolina was on. But in Illinois, we have IECC, International Energy Conservation Code 2018 version. The Indiana folks are on the same version. Most of the states in this area are on the same or similar codes. So 2018 for Indiana, 2018 for Illinois, 2018 for Michigan. Wisconsin residentially is not on either the 18 or the 15 standard. They're still back on the 2009. However, Wisconsin has the Uniform Dwelling Code, which has a lot of the same things we're going to be discussing today. So all the Lake Michigan states, if you will, all are found the same general guidelines and codes as far as what we need to do. I'm going to check and see if we have any questions, and I'm also going to shut down this other backup computer because I don't need it anymore. Okay. So, starting off with the energy code has requirement for programmable thermostats. In addition to that, the programmable thermostats need to be set so that they do not heat above 70 degrees and they do not cool below 78. I know most of you are probably not comfortable at 78 degrees. Just guessing. However, my house, I keep it at 77 in the summertime. That sounds crazy high. But trust me, my family doesn't like it warm or anything like that. In fact, I'm working from home today because they're epoxying the floor at work, so I'm here. And my kids are running around with no shirts on right now. That's just like normal behavior for them. It's 69 degrees in the house and they got no shirts on. That's how they operate. The boys. But I keep my house in the summertime at 77 and it's fine. But I also actively control the humidity, which lots of other people do not do. But anyway, from a code standpoint, when you guys install a residential system, you're supposed to set the heating no higher than 70 and the cooling no lower than 78. That means someone's already expecting you to have designed the system to be comfortable at 78 degrees. If you look at the code, that's what the thermostat's got to be at, 70 and 78. But there's also design requirements in the code. They actually require you and prohibit you from designing the space of a residential occupancy to be heated higher than 72 degrees. You are not allowed to design something to be heated up to 73 or 74. It is against the energy code. Likewise, you are not allowed to design it to be able to cool the building below 75. So if your customer says, I want it to be 68 degrees in here, you could design it that way, but you would not be following code. 75 is the absolute coldest temperature you're allowed to design the indoor space to for an occupied space. That also sounds high to probably many of you. To me, it doesn't sound high because I keep mine at 77. But for you guys, it probably does sound high. And most of you probably are not comfortable at 75 degrees. A little bit crazy sounding. The weather data is also dictated to you by code. So the code's saying, how cold can I make it inside? 75. And then they're also saying to you, when I do my load calc, what's the temperature I have to assume it is going to be outside? So this one happens to be for Illinois. This is out of ACA Manual J, and ACA Manual J is required by the Energy Code, so hence this is required. You are supposed to be designing the heating system for a 2-degree day. Not 0, not -5, not -10 in Illinois, in Chicagoland, but 2 degrees. On the cooling side, supposed to be designing for a maximum 89 degrees. That is statistically the hottest day of the year. Now, we all know it gets hotter than that. There's going to be a 90-something degree day, maybe even 100, right? But that is a statistical anomaly for a few hours a day, a few times every 30 years. Statistically, 89 degrees is what we're supposed to be shooting for. You're not allowed to design for a 95-degree day. That is against the code. If you look at things pictorially, because, you know, I'm a dumb hillbilly, I like my pictures. And by the way, if there's any hillbillies that are on the call, I do apologize for my bad accent and my bad hat and the fact that I haven't shaved in a while. It's just the function of the way things have been going the past 2 weeks. In any case, if we look at things pictorially, you can see there's very, very few hours in Chicagoland where it's above 90 degrees outside. And likewise, there's only a handful of hours when it's below 0 degrees, and that's usually at night when people have relaxed temperature control to begin with. So there's not a lot of times you need to go below 2 and above 89 either way. For my friends in Wisconsin, I mentioned the Uniform Dwelling Code. It has the exact same kind of language we just saw on the International Energy Conservation Code, except in this particular case, they don't allow you to heat above 70. So for the other states, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, we were talking about, 72 is your maximum heating design for indoor temperature. For Wisconsin, it's only 70. You're not allowed to go up to 72 on your design. They don't specify a high-end limit on there. Only the heating limit is specified there. But they also do require the ECA manual J calculations to be done. And so you have those same outdoor temperatures that you're dealing with. So if I take Milwaukee as my base case, you're not supposed to be using higher than or colder than a 2-degree day. So you can't design for 0. You can't design for -5, -10. And you can't go above 87 on the cooling side if you're following ECA manual J. However, the Uniform Dwelling Code has an amendment to that. So for Milwaukee specifically, you're required by state law to design for -10 and 89. So the state law in Wisconsin is forcing you to automatically oversize a little bit, right? Instead of using, for Milwaukee, 2 and 87 as your design outdoor temps, they're making you use -10 and 89. So before you even did anything else, you've already oversized a little bit in Milwaukee based on the code forcing you to do that. So don't do the code, which causes oversizing, and then do other stuff to cause oversizing. And I will mention the other stuff as we go along. I'm getting some comments about my really crappy accent. I'll try to tone it down a little bit for y'all, and I'll use a different accent. I'll try to go with Chicago West suburban accent and see if we can roll with that. For my folks in Wisconsin, similar kind of story. It gets a little bit colder there than it does in Chicago, but still statistically not a lot of days that are really cold, not a lot of days that are really hot. I would rather, in any of these states we're talking about in the Midwest, and any state for that matter, be more comfortable when it's 70, 75, 80, 85 for all of those hours, a couple thousand hours a year, than be comfortable that one freaky day when it's 95, all right? On the low end, I always get the question. Well, actually, I haven't gotten the question in the past year. But prior to that, I would always get the question, dude, man, if I design for the 2 degrees you're talking about, my house is going to freeze and my customers are going to be pissed, blah, blah, blah. I have to do it for -10. What if it ever is -10, right? Well, guess what? It has been -10. Polar vortex day 100% proved my freaking point that I've been complaining to all of you about for the past couple weeks. Absolutely proved my point. I can't tell you how many people I've polled. It's well over 400 people at this point. What happened on Polar Vortex Day? Was your furnace or your boiler able to heat your house? How many of your customers could not heat their house because their furnace was too small? Not because their furnace was broke. That's different. But how many couldn't heat their house because their furnace was too small? That was a very small number of people. I am up to 9 people. Wait a minute. I went hillbilly there. I can't count above. Okay. 9 people out of like 400 that had an example were on Polar Vortex Day, -23, -26, whatever that was, that couldn't heat their structure. I also do a lot of help with Ecobee stats and support people on those requests. And one of the things I ask for a lot is people to send me a screenshot of their Ecobee graph, which looks like what I have on the screen here, to help them out with different troubleshooting problems. As a coincidence to doing that, I've collected several graphs on Polar Vortex Day that people were sending me for other problems, and it happened to illustrate this oversizing issue as well. So this particular one I'm showing you up on the screen here, they had a heating set point of 72, and on a -23 degree day, the best they could heat the house up to was 68. I don't think that's that bad. it's running continuously. This orange bar means it never cycled off, it was running continuously. But for that one time, every 30 years that it gets below -10, they couldn't heat their house above 68. I'm okay with that. That's not a big deal to me. Here's another example. These folks did maintain set point. You can see, well, their system was cycling on and off. So they had it set for 67. They would get to 67 and would drop down to 66. They'd kick it back on. But every time this little orange graph here is showing that little gap, that means it was not running the heat. Orange means heat. Gray means no heat. In this particular case, it was a -21 degree day where my white line is at. On a -21 degree day, their system was still too oversized, and hence it had to cycle on and off to satisfy. This one happened to be Rhinelander, Wisconsin, where the design temp is -8 degrees per ASHRAE and per ACCA. Minneapolis, which also happens to be -8 degrees for their design temp. This is a -25 degree day where this white bar happens to be. And their system was cycling on and off as well, bouncing between 67 and 69 degrees. And even at night, it would even shut off for hours at a crack when it was -30 degrees in Minneapolis, oversized. And this is not me cherry picking a bunch of graphs. This is literally just random graphs that people were sending to me to help them troubleshoot other problems. No special effort required to find these graphs. Here's another one, same kind of thing, right? There's an endless supply of these that I have. So what makes people comfortable? What makes people comfortable? There's specific parameters that we look at in order to figure out when you're comfortable and not comfortable. Temperature is obviously one of those parameters, right? No brainer. We call that dry bulb temp because moisture is not involved. You guys probably are familiar with that. Relative humidity is a huge deal. If you get the relative humidity right, then the dry bulb almost doesn't matter. The higher the dry bulb is, I'll say it a different way. The higher the humidity is in the winter, the lower the dry bulb I can be comfortable at. And then vice versa for cooling. And I probably should have kept that slide up, but if I just go back a few, just a few too many. Okay, all the way back. If you look at that psychometric chart, for you guys that are familiar with that, the different bands on the chart here, the dark gray is winter clothing, the white is the summer clothing level, so your insulative values. This shows you that there's a range of comfort levels between, say, 70 and 25% relative humidity, and the cooler the temperature, the more humidity you'd want, or vice versa, the lower the humidity, the warmer the temperature you're going to need to be comfortable. It's kind of a sliding scale, if you will. Dave types in a question. Let me see here. I believe we are supposed to use the most recent ASHRAE weather data from the ASHRAE handbook for our load calculations. For example, Midway is 91.9, 0.5 summer, winter from the 2007 fundamentals. So for commercial systems, Dave, the energy code would point you towards using ASHRAE data. For residential systems, it actually requires you to use ACCA Manual J, which were these temperatures that I was showing up here. So you could go to your inspector, I'll show you here. You could go to your inspector and make a case to use the ASHRAE data. So they're saying here, this is the code language. Heating and cooling equipment shall be sized according to ACCA Manual S, that's the sizing calculation tool, based on building loads in accordance with ACCA Manual J, that's the load calc tool, or other approved heating and cooling calculation methodologies. So you need to use the ACCA Manual J and its data, which includes the weather data, or you have to convince your authority having jurisdiction, your inspector, that you'd like to use the ASHRAE data. In the past, I've not seen anyone have any problem getting an inspector to approve ASHRAE data. If you have some other random, so most of them will easily take ACCA because they have to, ASHRAE because it's obvious. And I've even heard of one taking that, what is the, I can't even pronounce the acronym, NIOSH, like the North Atlantic Ocean, whatever that one is, that weather data. But you can't make up other stuff. You can't be like, my grandpa has a yellow scratch pad and a thermometer and he records all the temperatures. That's not going to fly. But technically you have to use ACCA, and then you could go with ASHRAE residentially with the other approved language on here. Commercially, it would be the opposite. ASHRAE would be your energy code default standard. Residentially, it would be ACCA. Let me get back caught up here. All right, so temperature, humidity. For those that don't really understand how those things necessarily relate to each other, I would give you my favorite example, which is Las Vegas versus Miami, right? If you've ever been to Las Vegas on a 100-degree day, it is damn hot in Las Vegas. 100 degrees, it's smoking hot, right? Miami on 100 degrees is hot and nasty, right? You can go outside in Vegas, look at your arm, and you won't see a single water droplet on your arm, not even one. It evaporates right off, right? But in Miami, you sweat a little bit, what you're going to do, and the water just lingers on you. There's nowhere for it to go because it's already 90% humidity. There's nowhere for the moisture to go. So it just like stays on you, on your clothes. It runs down into your socks. It's just gross. But on a thermometer, 100 degrees either way, right? Same difference, 100 degrees. But the humidity makes a huge factor in the human comfort of that. Air motion plays a part in that as well. When I was a kid, I didn't have air conditioning. So when we were hot, we'd go stand in front of a box fan. Well, guess what? The discharge air temperature on a box fan is warmer than the inlet temperature on the box fan. There's some waste heat off the motor. Why the hell is it making you cool? Well, because the air velocity takes your body's heat and moves it away from your body, hence making it possible for you to cool your body off. Air motion does play a factor. When you're warm, you want more air motion. When you're cold, you want less air motion. Radiant temperature has a factor on there as well, right? If the sun is shining down on you, or you have a radiator or a radiant floor or something like that, your body absorbs that radiant heat, that infrared heat. So if you have a radiant flooring system in your house or in your customer's house, they will keep their thermostat at a lower set point than other people with a similar house, right? So if your buddy keeps his house at 70 with forced air furnaces and you have a radiant floor system, you might keep yours at 64. You might be equally comfortable because you're getting the heat into your body a different way other than heating the air. Air is by far one of the absolute worst ways to transfer heat. But in the United States, in good old America, and in Canada, ducted systems are the dominant way we heat and cool buildings. Everywhere else in the world, ducting is not a normal thing. It's a side discussion for special projects or for ventilation needs. But your normal heating and cooling is done with chilled water, hot water, radiation, ductless mini splits, that kind of stuff. But that radiant heat from a hot source will help heat your body as well. Air cleanliness comes into play on human comfort. That's been a bigger issue the past couple weeks, obviously. Odors affects your comfort level, and then noise. Sometimes, residentially, you pretty much want the quietest system you could possibly get, especially when people are sleeping eventually at their home. Quieter is better. Commercially, sometimes we can get too quiet, and it kind of violates the speech privacy guidelines. If you have like a cubicle farm with a bunch of people, like a call center or something, you want some background noise, not necessarily from the HVAC, but from something. You want some background noise in order to have that speech privacy going on. But residentially, typically, the quieter you can get it, the better. People would rather not hear their furnace, rather not hear their air conditioner. All right? These are nothing new. These are the exact same things we've been talking about for 100 years, literally 100 years. For you guys that were on the Psychometric webinar this morning, 2002 or whatever, we've been doing this kind of stuff. Or excuse me, 1902. So that's 118 years of psychometric data being available to us. None of the stuff has changed. This is an ad from 1935, Buffalo Forge Company, which, if you didn't know, that's where Willis Carrier worked before there was a Carrier, before he made that company. And they were talking in their ads about the same stuff. Temperature, humidity, air motion, it's all the same thing. Nothing has really changed in that regard. So people are generating heat. And all the time, your body's trying to dump heat. You're trying to get rid of all of this heat. Even in the wintertime, you're trying to dump heat. Now, you're not needing to dump it as in the same scenario as you are in the summertime, but you are still getting rid of heat. The amount of heat your body generates is a function of what you're doing. If you're sitting still like this dude, or you're dancing like that lady, right, you have a different amount of heat. I don't know why she's wearing those clothes, other than these slides are 15 years old. But other than that, I don't know why she's dressed like that. That's weird. So how does your body get rid of heat? You have four main mechanisms to get rid of heat. We have conduction, convection. Don't confuse those two because they both start with C-O-N. Radiation and evaporation. Those are the ways I can get rid of heat. I have a 98-degree core in my body. My skin surface is probably like, I don't know, 92, 93, something like that. I'm dumping this heat constantly, trying to get rid of it. So the first way we transfer heat is conduction. So with conduction, let me check and see if we have any questions while we're doing that. I think we're okay on questions for right now. All right, so conduction is transferring heat through touching. So in this particular case, we have a heat source, in this case candle, and a metal rod. We're heating up one end of the metal rod, and it's heating all the way through to the guy's hand. All right. My favorite example, because I have lots of favorite examples of conduction, because I'm a dork. If you have one of those like electric stovetops, right, If you were to take your hand and just set it down on the stove top and touch the stove while it was on, holy cow, would that be hot, right? Your hand would come right back off. Like, holy shit, your hand would come off. It'd be super hot. Heat would transfer into your hand so damn quickly, you'd burn your hand, right? But if you hovered your hand just like an inch above that burner, above that glass stovetop burner, it would be really, really hot, but it wouldn't burn your hand immediately. It would take a little bit of time. But as soon as you touch it, game over, right? So conduction is a very fast way to transfer heat. The other thing to understand about heat transfer, all the time, it's always going from hot to cold. Everything moves that way in the universe. Heat goes from hot to cold always. Now, there's some tricks we can play with refrigeration, and we'll mention those at the end today, to make it seem like we're not following those rules, but we really still are. But heat always goes from hot to cold. Humidity always goes from high to low. Pressure goes high to low. It's like the universe is always trying to get to this equilibrium state where everything's just completely balanced, right? So conduction is transferring through direct contact. Your body is conducting heat to your shirt and your hat and whatever else you have going on, right? You're conducting heat through the touching of all the things that you're connected to. So my body is conducting heat to this shirt. This shirt is conducting heat to the little air molecule next to the shirt. Now, after that, different mechanisms are going to dominate. We'll talk about those in a minute, but that's the conduction part of it. The cooler the thing I'm touching is, or the hotter the thing I'm touching is, in other words, the delta T difference between my body and the thing will determine how fast the heat transfers. So if my body's 98 degrees and I'm in a 50-degree room, I have a 48-degree delta T, heat can transfer fairly quickly. If I'm in an 80-degree room, I only have an 18-degree delta T, heat will not transfer away from my body as quickly. So I'll probably need other mechanisms to help cool me off. Opposite would be true. If the room is above 98 degrees, now my body's really going to struggle to reject heat, right? If you go into a sauna, there's no possibility of your body sending its heat through conduction to the room itself. We have other mechanisms, evaporation and sweating, to get that done, and we'll talk about those. But conduction-wise, heat goes from hot to cold, and all of a sudden, if the room is hot, hotter than my body, heat's going to go to my body. The amount of clothing you have is the insulative value that slows down this conduction. So depending on how you're dressed, that will make a difference. Residentially, we don't really consider clothing level when we design systems. It's not a big factor because you have no idea what you're going to wear. You're going to be naked getting out of the shower. You're going to have on your coat and jacket while you're getting ready to go to the grocery store. You have this wide extreme of how you're going to be dressed. But in commercial buildings, it becomes a pretty good factor. Say we do a doctor's office. We know people are going to be in the examination rooms sitting there half naked with like half a robe tied around them. We don't want to keep those rooms at like 72 degrees. We're going to jack those up to like 75, 76, keep them warmer for heating purposes because you're going to be naked. Right? So we take that into account on those systems. Our second type of heat transfer mechanism is called convection. Convection is transferring energy through a fluid. In this particular example, we're transferring it through water. Right? So I have the flames licking the bottom of that pan, heating up that pan. Those flames are touching the pan. They're heating the bottom of the pan with conduction. And then the bottom of the pan is heating the water with conduction. But then once that bottom water molecule heats up, what's he going to want to do? Well, he gets warmer than the other water molecules around him. So he becomes more buoyant than those water molecules. So he rises up. Well, when he rises up, there's not a hole left where he was at. There's not a gaping space there. Another water droplet fills his spot. So as somebody rises up, somebody else slides into his spot, right? And we end up with this convective loop going around. Air works the exact same way, right? So in terms of your body getting rid of heat, I use conduction to transfer heat to the shirt. I use conduction to transfer heat from the shirt to the air molecule right next to my shirt. But then once that happens, that air molecule is more buoyant than all of his buddies, so he starts rising up. And I end up having heat rising up my whole body and coming off the top of my head. Right? If I took a thermometer, I measured temperature right here, and I measured it at my foot, there'd be a couple degrees difference there. The heat's moving up my body in that fashion. And I have a conductive pattern of heat moving off of me. I can use fan systems to speed that up, and we often do that in many residential and even commercial systems. We'll have forced air convection by moving the air through the space to help distribute the BTUs that way. Either picking BTUs up from the space and taking them back to be cooled, or vice versa in the opposite season, just depending on what I'm doing. But I can speed that process up. The third mechanism for heat transfer is radiation. So radiation is invisible rays of heat energy The sun is radiating down to the earth and onto your body. A campfire in this example is radiating onto that guy. A radiator obviously radiates. A radiant floor radiates. If you're in your office and you're sitting underneath a bunch of can lights, the can light radiates. Us bald guys understand that better than other people. I'm hot here. I move over one chair. I'm not hot, right? In this particular case, there's a 400-degree fire sitting there. That guy's body is 98 degrees. Heat is going from the fire to his body. And for the most part, the radiant energy cuts through the air. It doesn't really heat the air up. It does a tiny bit, but for the most part, it's heating up objects, things that can directly shine on, things that have mass. Air does have mass, but it's small. My body has a lot of mass, so I get more of that heat. So if it's 50 degrees in the air there, it's probably 50 degrees in front of that guy, and it's 50 degrees behind that guy. But his shirt, his chest is feeling warm from the campfire. His backside is freezing, which is why every once in a while you turn around and heat up your backside on the campfire, right? That radiant energy is going through, it travels in a waveform, and it's going in line of sight. So if you put something in between that guy and the fire, or if you're outside and it's sunny and you hold up an umbrella, the umbrella will block the sun, and hence you won't get as much radiant energy and you won't get as much heat onto your body. Radiation, just like everything else, heat goes from hot to cold. So if that window gets warmed up by the sun and that window is now above 98 degrees, that glass window is going to radiate energy to my body. And likewise, when it's cold outside, that glass is going to be 20, 30, 40 degrees. And now I'm the heating source, and heat goes from me to the glass. It'll radiate over from that direction. Whichever one's hotter sends its energy to the other one. We can slow down some of this heat transfer in a building, just like you can wear clothing to slow down heat transfer that way. Buildings, we do the same thing. We can use insulation. So we can insulate walls and stuff. This is just showing you typical insulative values for a lot of the houses that you guys are currently retrofitting. So stuff built 20 years ago, this was pretty common insulation values. If I did this chart now with the current code, I want to say walls are like R19 and I think roofs are like R50 or something like that. When I built my house, I think it was R19 in the walls and R30 in the attic was required in 2002. It constantly goes up, although we're kind of at the maximum here without diminishing returns. But I want to show you this because I want to show you the windows on here. So in this case, I don't have a double pane window on here, which is unfortunate, but I have a single pane window and a single pane with a storm window, which is kind of like a double pane. So if I have a single pane window and it is negative 10 degrees outside, the inside of the glass is positive 10. If it's double pane and it's negative 10, the inside of the glass is 46 degrees. It's a pretty big difference. 2 panes of glass plus the air gap between them is an insulative value. Air is a good insulator because, once again, it's a shitty way to transfer heat. So air is a good insulator as long as the air can't move and it's stuck between the panes, so it's a good insulator. Same thing happens in the summertime. Single pane window on a 95-degree day, it's going to be 90-degree glass. Double pane window on a 95-degree, it's going to be 81-degree glass. So those windows are going to make a difference on the perceived comfort level of the people in the space. Our fourth mechanism for heat transfer is evaporation. This is the ability for my body to sweat away the heat, if you will, to dump the heat through moisture removal, through the latent energy transfer. So this is actually a pretty big deal. If you've noticed, not all animals sweat. Some animals don't have that ability. In fact, most animals don't. Humans do, and some primates do. Your dog can't sweat. Your dog can just hold his tongue out. That's about all you can do. But his skin does not sweat. It's not a thing, right? There are several reasons that humans evolved better than other animals. Assuming this is better, I don't know. We might be idiots for all I know. But brain size makes a big difference, and that comes from eating protein. So the ability for us to hunt animals and get bigger brains helped us develop beyond the other animals. The ability to make tools, because we have these thumbs that move, give us the ability with the brain size and the thumbs to build and use tools, which gave us an advantage. And the third thing, believe it or not, is actually the ability to sweat. Because before we were smart enough to make the tools to go hunting for the animals to get the good protein, we would just eat dead animals. We would just follow them around until they died. We would chase them, they would run, we'd catch up, we'd chase them again, they would run, and this would keep going on as they died of heat exhaustion because they couldn't sweat. We had the ability to sweat, they didn't, right? That's a side discussion and actually has nothing to do with this topic. I don't even know why I brought that up. But that evaporation is my third mechanism. Convection speeds up evaporation. So if there's no air motion and I sweat, the water just sits there and lingers around me. By the way, when you're sweating, it takes a lot of energy to convert the moisture droplet on my arm into a vapor state and have it go out into the space. It needs a lot of heat to do that. Guess where it gets the heat from? Me. My body heat is what is being used to evaporate that moisture out. If I have a fan speeding up the air motion, it speeds the whole process up. So if you stand in front of a fan to cool off, okay, moves the heat away from you. If you're sweaty and you stand in front of a fan, you cool off really fast. Or maybe you're outside swimming on an 85-degree day and you get out of the pool and a breeze comes along, you feel cool. Dude, it's 85 degrees. Why are you cool? Well, because you're wet and the air blew the moisture away from you faster, so it sped up that evaporative process. Howard is actually typing in a question, is it 95 summer and -10 winter design in Chicago? It is not. We pulled up the weather data for Chicago, and I believe for residential, Emanuel J, we just looked at it, I think it was 2 degrees for O'Hare and 89 degrees for Coolin. If you're looking at the ASHRAE data, it's a couple degrees different, but it is definitely not 95, nor has it ever been 95 in Chicago. That is a common mistake. The only thing that we've ever used 95 for is that all of the equipment that we are ordering for a project was all the cooling equipment was all tested and rated at 95 degrees. Everything is tested with 80-67, 80 dry bulb, 67 wet bulb entering condition on the evaporator coil, and it's tested with 95-degree ambient on the condenser coil. But that is not the design temp in Chicago. If you use the 95-degree number, I promise you, you are going to contribute to the oversizing. And we're going to get back on track here in a minute here, but there's a lot of factors, boom, 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 that are contributing to the oversizing problem. And it is the reason why we have equipment that is double sized. Yes, I'm talking to you people. All of us, the industry, has been double sizing equipment. I'm not even exaggerating. It's twice as big as you need. All right, so we'll keep on moving here. Finish this heat transfer discussion. The amount of latent energy you can sweat to the space is a function of how much latent energy is already in the air. So the more humid the air is, Miami, the harder it is for me to sweat in Miami. Whereas in Vegas, it's easy for me to sweat. Now that seems weird, like I don't see my sweat in Vegas. Yeah, you sweat and it's gone. In Miami, you sweat and it's still on you, and you hence didn't get rid of the heat yet. It's a function of the relative humidity that is going on around you. The higher the humidity, the slower the evaporation. The lower the humidity, the faster the evaporation. So air itself is a mixture. You probably already knew that. If I take a given box of air, in this case I counted up 55 little grains of moisture in it. I envision a grain as a water droplet. It is not a water droplet, but I have to visualize it as something, so that's what it looks like in my head. But I got 55 grains of moisture in this little box here. If I go over to my psych chart, and we just did psychometrics this morning for you guys that are on the webinar. If you weren't on that webinar and you want to watch it, tecmungo.com/training, and you can watch all the recorded webinars, including the psychometric series. But in this case, I'm at 70 degrees. I go up the chart to where I get to the 100% saturation line, 100% humidity, and I read it across, and I realize I could hold at a maximum 110 grains of moisture. That means 70-degree air cannot hold 111 grains of moisture. It's not possible. One of those grains has to fall out of solution and become a liquid form on the side of your beer can, on the windshield of your car, or something like that. All right? 110 is the most. Well, if I had 55 and my maximum is 110, some simple math tells me I have 55 out of 110, I have 50% relative humidity. But if I went and looked at this on a 92-degree day, I guess this is a bad example because the chart doesn't go up to 92. If I followed 92 degrees all the way up, I would see that on a 92-degree day at 100% humidity, the air can hold 220 grains of moisture. I have 55. My maximum was 220. Guess what? It's 25% humidity. Which of those two air streams has more air? Guess what? They have the exact more air. Dumb, Ryan. Which one has more moisture? They have the exact same amount. They both have 55 grains of moisture. But one of them is 50% humidity. One of them is 25. It's going to be easier for me to sweat in a 25-degree space. On the wintertime example, if I have air leaking into my building, into my home, in this case, I have 20-degree outside air with 7.5 grains of moisture because outside air in the winter is fairly dry. Now, it's 50% humidity, which doesn't sound dry. Yeah, but it's 50% at 20 degrees. That's not very much moisture. It can't hold very much to begin with. It can only hold 15 grains at 20 degrees, and I have 7.5, so I have half of it. But it's not a lot of actual tangible moisture. The relative humidity thing is kind of confusing. And you look at your weather app or the news or whatever you get humidity information and temperature information from, They usually don't mention humidity in the winter outside. They tell you in the summer, oh yeah, dude, it's going to be like 90 degrees and like 85% humidity. It's going to be nasty, right? In the winter, they don't talk about the outdoor humidity because it would always be like 80% humidity because there's hardly any ability for humidity to be held in the air. In any case, this air leaks in really dry with only 7.5 grains of moisture and it mixes with your house air. When that air comes in, that 20-degree air actually warms up because of the wall assembly it's going through warms it up and it gets into the side of the space and it becomes 70 as well. Well, that 7.5 grains of moisture at 70 degrees now is only 7% humidity, which is why the house is so dry because you're leaking this outside air in. If you want the house in the wintertime to not be as dry, you have two choices. You can add a humidifier, which we're pretty good at in this industry. We do it really well. Or you can stop the air from leaking into the house. One of the many reasons why energy codes now make the house be sealed tighter. We don't want that air leaking in. The whole entire house has to be sealed tighter. We have to blower our test to prove that we've sealed it tighter. And then they make us punch a hole in the wall and bring some fresh air in through a controlled mechanism into my furnace. I get it. You're sealing it and then punching a hole in the wall sounds kind of weird. But when I do it that way, I can heat it, cool it, humidify it, dehumidify it, filter it, all those good things. In any case, these houses that we're building now in the past 20 years are significantly tighter than older houses. And when you guys do your load calculations, for most of these load calculations, guess what you need to put in for infiltration air? 0. Do not put infiltration air in on a modern house. Now, when you could look at the blower door test data from the energy rater, and you can use that data to calculate the infiltration, and you'll find out basically it's 0 if the building met code. So stop putting infiltration in your load calc. It's not a big deal in real life. On the load calc, when you put in a fake number, it ends up being a massive percentage of the load calc. We're doing load calcs as a webinar on Wednesday for you guys that are interested, residential load calcs, and we'll talk about that more. But stop putting in infiltration, and definitely do not use the default infiltration that the software manufacturer put in there. It is massively conservative, and it is one of the major contributors to oversized equipment. All right, so we talked about the humidity thing. We talked about all the ways your body can transfer heat. When we do the actual load calcs into space, what are we actually going to look at? We look at the internal heat gains and the external heat gains. I'm talking about cooling for the moment here, right? For residential, we look at people and lights. The other stuff on this list doesn't really matter residentially. Yeah, people are cooking and stuff, but well, I usually joke that nobody's cooking anymore these days, but the past 2 weeks, that's not a funny joke because everybody hasn't cooked like 3 meals a day. My stove has gotten more used to the past 2 weeks than it's gotten in the past year. Actually, I didn't say that. My wife cooks all the time, so definitely do not pass that information on to her. But we look at the things that are generating heat inside, and we account for those. Then we look at the things that are generating heat outside, and we have to account for those. We have 4 ways the heat's getting from outside to inside in the summer. So in this example, it's a 90-degree day. It's 75 degrees in my space, so a 15-degree delta T. The bigger the delta T, the faster and more heat is going to be transferred through the assembly. So if it's 90 degrees outside and 89 inside, not a lot of heat's going to the inside, right? If it's 90 degrees outside and it's 60 degrees inside, that's a 30-degree delta T. It's going to cost me a lot of energy to handle that place to cool it. But in this case, I got 15. So it's coming through the building through transmission. This is the conduction, if you will. The outdoor air is warming up the walls and roof. That's warming up through the internal layers of the wall, and that's warming up the inside surface of the wall, and then that's warming up the air in your room. Infiltration is the air leaking into my building. And then I have the solar gains. That's the sun shining through the window. Now, the sun also shines on the sides of the building and the roof, but that warms up the temperature of those surfaces, and those come to the building as a transmission gain. But the sun that shines through the glass into the building comes through as a solar gain. And then whatever it lands on, floor, desk, person, couch, that object gets warmed up. Some of the light does reflect back off the glass, a very small portion, but most of it's going straight through the glass, unless you have awnings, curtains, something like that to block it, trees, those kind of things. So we take all these things into account when we calculate the cooling load. When we do the heating load, it's a little bit different. First off, we don't even look at the inside. I don't look at people, I don't look at lights, right? Because over here, the worst case scenario for cooling is people are home and lights are on. And it's a hot day and it's sunny. That's the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario for heating is nobody's home, the lights are off, it's the middle of the night, there is no sun. So I don't look at any internal gains, And I don't look at any sun. So the heating load calc is significantly easier than the cooling load calc. Not to mention there's no dehumidification discussion, which helps out a lot with the math as well. In this case, it's -5 outside, 70 inside. I have a 75-degree delta T across that wall assembly, and I can calculate how much heat is leaving the building because of that. All right, so some things to consider on the cooling. Do not oversize the equipment. Even if you perfectly size the equipment, that's on a design day, 89, 90 degrees. The rest of the year, it's going to be oversized, and it means it's going to cycle on and off because it's only partially loaded. So if you oversize it for a design day, it gets really, really ugly on the non-design days. Dehumidification only takes place when the compressor is running and when it's running for a reasonably long time. What does that mean? Your thermostat calls for cooling because it's hot in there, right? Or it's warmer than you want in there. The compressor kicks on. It starts sending refrigerant to the evaporator coil inside your house above your furnace. The evaporator coil starts getting cooler. We blow air across the evaporator coil, starting to cool your house off. We've not done any dehumidification yet. I don't start dehumidifying until that evaporator coil gets cooler and cooler and cooler and then gets cold enough to get down to the dew point of the air going across it. Once I get to the dew point of the air, I am now, by definition, 100% saturated. I cannot hold any more moisture, so if I try to get the coil a little tiny bit colder, guess what happens? Can't hold any more moisture, I got the coil colder. Water droplets have to condense out of the air. They condense out of the air onto the coil, they drain themselves down into the drain pan, and then they go out of the system that way. Right? The problem with oversized equipment is that the thermostat kicks on, it calls for cooling, we start cooling the evaporator, cool air starts coming into the house, and then the thermostat gets satisfied. It says, oh, dude, I got down to 72 like you wanted. Perfect, we're done. I'm like, but wait a minute, we didn't dehumidify yet. Not my problem, got to 72. It satisfies the thermostat too quickly, which means I get short run cycles. I need the run cycles to be 15, 20-minute run cycles at a crack in order to get good dehumidification. If your thing's turning on and off every 5, 6, 7 minutes, it's probably not getting it done. The first 3, 4 minutes is not dehumidifying at all. So I turn it on, got 3, 4 minutes of no dehumidification. I don't see any water droplets coming down my drain off my coil. I finally get to the dew point, I do a little bit of dehumidification, then all of a sudden my thermostat stops and we're done. That's the problem with the oversized equipment. I don't get any dehumidification because I can't get a long enough run cycle. And the other problem, obviously, is because I'm not getting good dehumidification, we have those comfort issues and then the indoor air quality issues that we were talking about before. Right? If it's really high humidity, certain viruses and bacteria thrive. High humidity, all mold pretty much thrives, right? So I need to keep that stuff in check. We just talked about the cooling coil and the water dripping off that. Right? If you don't believe me, when we get to summertime, run your own system at home. Take off the cover off your evaporative coil, sit there with a flashlight, and watch their water droplets drip down. Right? It's super fun. You need a 6-pack of beer to do it, I'm pretty sure. Or if you're too lazy to do that, just watch them dripping down the PVC pipe. Time it. How many minutes does it take before you see water drop out? I promise you it's not going to be dropping out in 3 minutes. So when we're dehumidifying this air, we're going to pull the moisture out of that air. There's a couple factors that are going to be involved in here. My cooling coil, for example, has some factors that are involved. So I have 78-degree entering air coming into my coil, 49% relative humidity. It goes to the coil. It gets cooled down to the dew point, hopefully, and I have condensation drip out of it. This is a steady state scenario, right? I've been running it for X amount of minutes already. It's going to lower my temperature down to 55 degrees. It's going to reduce my grains of moisture. In this case, 8 grains of moisture, 72 down to 64. But I'm going to go up to 100% relative humidity. Whoa, time out. I'm going to cool and dehumidify your space by giving you 100% humid air? Yes, I actually have to do that. The only way to get the water out of the air is to get to the saturation line, which is 100% humidity. I have to get to 100% humidity in order for me to pull the moisture out of the air. Now, that doesn't mean 100% humidity in your space. That's 100% humidity right at the discharge of the coil. Then there's going to be some bypass air that mix with. Then it's going to get delivered to the space and mix with your warmer space air. When I mix it with the warmer space air, the relative humidity percentage is going to go down. But honestly, I don't care about the relative humidity percent. That's for suckers. Real people know that the grains of moisture is the deal. 72 down to 64, 8 grains of moisture, or in Ryan's world, 8 little droplets of water fell off into the drain. All right? So we got that mixture. Some of that air is going to be bypassing. Some of the air is going to go through the coil and touch nothing. It has to touch the coil for it to get dehumidified and for it to get cooled down. If it gets through there scot-free, Comes in at 78, leaves at 78. It didn't touch anything, right? And eventually those guys, the bypass guys and the non-bypass guys mix together, and that's how you get your true temperature off the coil. So maybe 53 coming off the coil, and you got some guys getting through scot-free at 78 degrees, and they mix together to get to me to the 55. We call that bypass factor. That's how much of the air doesn't actually make contact with the coil. It just squirts on through. There are factors involved that I can deal with from a design and from an operating standpoint to make sure my bypass factor is low. In the perfect world, I'd have 0 bypass factor, right? Every single air molecule that went in would have gotten cooled and dehumidified and touched the coil. But that would be pretty prohibitive. That'd be pretty high static to have it going through that coil that nothing can get through. So I can't handle that, obviously. But I want as low as bypass factor as possible. There are some factors that are involved in that. If you guys that were with us for psychometrics this morning probably heard some of these. Reducing the airspeed. If I'm an air molecule, I'm going through the coil. If I'm going through fast, you're probably not going to get me to touch something. I'm probably going to be able to sneak through without banging into anything, right? If you go through slowly, it's more likely going to bounce off of one of the fins, one of the surface areas, right? So slow the air down will help you out. There are 2 ways you can slow the air down. You can slow the air down by design. Designed for a lower airflow or a lower velocity of airflow right from the get-go. That's one scenario. Scenario 2 is if you have a multi-speed tap motor, which almost everybody does residentially. Every PSC and ECM furnace has multiple speed taps or dip switches. Put it on a lower airflow setting. The lower the airflow setting, the better. The more dehumidification you are going to get. You're going to get a better sensible heat ratio, meaning you're going to get a lower sensible heat ratio, which means you're going to get more latent dehumidification. Less airflow is good. Less airflow is better. Now, it can't be so cold that you freeze the evaporator, and it can't be so low that you can't get the CFM you need to the farthest duct run. But go as low as you can and still accomplish those other 2 things. You can put the coils more closely together. You can put the fins more closely together. You can add more rows of coil. You have some flexibility on there. The deeper I make the coil or the tighter gap I make between the fins, the less bypass I'm going to have as well. Residentially, you don't have a lot of choices in that regard. We do have what's called super coils, which means I got coils with more surface area. Commercially, you can specify all this stuff, fins per inch and all that stuff on a big commercial air handler. But residentially, you probably got 3 or 4 coils you're going to choose from that are pre-designed. Try to get the one that has the most surface area to it. Assuming that one fits in the space, obviously. Right, then we're going to throw this coil in there. We're going to blow air across it, cool it, dehumidify it, deliver it to your space, absorb some heat, absorb some moisture, send it back, repeat the process. You guys get the drill on that part of it. Right, refrigeration process in general. I wasn't going to include this, but people always ask, like, Ryan, you said everything goes from hot to cold, but like my house is 70 degrees and I'm shoving the heat from my house to my 90-degree yard. How the hell is that happening, right? That's the refrigeration cycle at work there. And to understand the refrigeration cycle, we have to first look at boiling water. Why are we looking at boiling water? Well, it's just an easy example for me, that's why. And somebody else already made the slide, so hence it's even easier. So I got a pot of water. It's 50 degrees city water. I throw it on the stove. I turn the flame on. I start adding BTUs to the water. I'm heating the water. It's getting warmer and warmer, 70 degrees, 80, 100, 150, 180, 200, 210, 211, 212 degrees. I'm still adding more flame underneath the pot, but it's not going above 212. It just stops there, right? Doesn't make any sense. I'm adding more heat. Why isn't the thermometer going up? Well, what happens at 212, as you all know, is we start boiling the water. We're now using the heat to change the state of the fluid from a liquid to a gas. It takes a lot of energy, or uses a lot of energy, or gives a lot of energy, depending on which way you want to look at it, to change the state of a fluid. Liquid to solid, solid to liquid, liquid to gas, gas to liquid, etc. So those BTUs are no longer being used to raise the thermometer temperature. They're now being used in order to boil the water and convert it to the latent energy, right? The total energy, the BTUs of my pot that I put in, is a combination of the sensible energy, thermometer rising, and the latent energy, changing the state of the fluid. Those 2 things get added together. When you look at the catalog data for an air conditioner, you will see 2 columns typically. You'll typically see the total heat and the sensible heat. And we make you do the math to figure out the latent heat. I don't know why we can't put a 3rd column in there. It doesn't make any sense to me. But there's 3 things involved: total, sensible, and latent. And if you know 2 of them, you can do some basic math and figure out the other, obviously. The magic comes in with pressure. So if you flash back to high school chemistry, PV equals nRT, right? Let's forget N. That has to do with the fluid we're working with. In this case, water in my example. Later on, refrigerant. It doesn't change. It's the same for whatever fluid you have. Let's forget R, because R is just a constant to make all of the mathematical units mesh out. So PV equals nRT. Just think of it as PV equates to T. P is pressure, V is volume, T is temperature. So pressure times volume is temperature. If I have this closed pot, pressure cooker, I lock it down, latch the sides of it, the volume cannot change. It is a fixed volume. If the volume is fixed, and I have PV equals nRT, the volume is fixed and the pressure goes up, guess what the temperature has to do? Temperature has to go up. If pressure goes down, temperature goes down. Because the volume is fixed, pressure and temperature go up and down together. If we look at a refrigerant, these are the typical boiling points. I can use water as a refrigerant. It's not a good refrigerant. It does not have a very attractive boiling point. People have built entire air conditioning systems using water as the refrigerant. It doesn't really work that well. I'm not talking about a water chiller where we still have refrigerant. I'm talking about using water as the actual refrigerant. I want something with a low boiling point, really low, negatives low. So if I look at R22, Freon, negative 41 degree boiling point, R410A, negative 62 degree boiling point. That's the kind of stuff that I want to work with for this scenario. I can get down to those temperatures by boiling the refrigerant off by changing the pressure. And with those colder temperatures, I can do some really magic with heat transfer. So what's the magic that we're going to do? So in the, let me see if I can get my little pointer arrow thingy. So in your house in the summertime, my evaporative coil in here is absorbing heat from the air, right? That's how my air is getting colder. Don't think of it as the coil makes the air cold. I mean, it does, but really it removes the heat from the coil. Think of it that way. So it extracts the heat from the air, excuse me. The coil extracts the heat from the air. That heat then gets transferred outside of the condensing unit where it rejects the heat. Now this is getting weird, right? Okay, I get it. We got a cold coil, 50 degrees. I can absorb heat with that, sure. Now I'm going to send this refrigerant outside, and I'm going to reject it into your 95 degree yard. How the hell are you going to do that, man? Right? Well, I'm going to do it by changing pressure here. So here's my four major components of the refrigeration cycle. My condenser coil on the left, my evaporative coil on the right, my compressor on the bottom, my TXV on the top. My compressor has one job only. His only job in life is to increase the pressure of the refrigerant. That's all he does. He doesn't do anything else special than that. He's not much different than the air compressor in your garage, right? Take this stuff, squeeze it into a tighter space, and increase its pressure. He's going to take refrigerant in. He's going to squeeze it into a tighter space, whether it's two scrolls rotating together, whether it's a screw grinding, whether it's a reciprocating compressor, whatever it is, it's going to smush the space down. Smush is a technical term. And by compressing that space down, it's going to increase the pressure of the refrigerant. I've compressed it. And when I increase the pressure of the refrigerant, PV equals nRT. So guess what has to happen to the temperature? Temperature goes up. Dude, you're going to cool my house by making the refrigerant hot? That sounds stupid. Yeah, it does sound stupid. I'm going to cool the refrigerant, cool the house by making the refrigerant hot. Because now once that refrigerant's hot, I can send it out to your yard. And now that 120 degree refrigerant is sitting in your 90 degree yard. That's a 30 degree delta T. Heat goes from hot to cold. No problem, man. Right? So over here on the evaporator, your air is 75 degrees. The coil is 40 degrees. Heat goes from hot to cold. I absorb the heat. No problem. I increase the pressure and temperature of the refrigerant by going through the compressor. Now I go from hot to cold outside. 120 to the 90 degree cool yard. No problem. The condenser and evaporator have opposite jobs of each other. Evaporator absorbs heat. Condenser rejects heat. Compressor and TXV have opposite jobs. The compressor compresses the refrigerant and raises its pressure. The TXV lowers the pressure of the refrigerant and meters it into the evaporator coil. That's why we got this dividing line between the high and the low side over here. Well, so what are the reasons people are oversizing? There's a lot of reasons why y'all are oversizing. Old habits, old rules of thumb. If you're using a rule of thumb at all, it's already wrong. Whatever your rule of thumb is, whoever gave it to you, wrong. If your grandpa gave it to you from his old shop in 1960, wrong. If you got it from some old manual in 1990, wrong. If you got it from your buddy who did a house 10 years ago and did a load calc, wrong. If you got it last week from a job you did, probably also wrong. Stop using the old rules of thumb. Stop using any rules of thumb. There is no answer on how big of a cooling system you should be per square foot. There are too many factors involved. tightness of the house, insulative values of the house, solar exposure, location of geography, changing the temperature outside. There is no proper rule of thumb. It's not a thing. Stop using it. People are lazy. When you go to an existing house and it's got a 4-ton air conditioner, what are you probably going to bid? A 4-ton air conditioner. What do they probably need? A 2-ton. I'm not even shitting. They probably need a 2-ton air conditioner. Almost every one of these ones that I've looked at, double size on air conditioner. It's so far off, it's not even close. My own house, I have, 2,860 square feet. Built in 2002, reasonably tight, decent insulation, R19 the walls, R30 in the attic, good low E windows, argon filled. Pretty nice house, right? As far as thermal goes. As far as attractiveness, it's a plain ugly box. My wife hates that part, but I like the thermalness of it. So 2,860 square feet. I didn't do any residential work back in 2002. I did building automation systems. So I asked all the dealers, hey, what size should I put in? I got a wide range of answers from 4 tons to 6 tons. Most people said 5 tons, but I got 4, and I got 2 4s and a 6 as an answer. 6 tons. I'm like, we're gonna make a 6-ton, dude. 5's the biggest. He's like, yeah, you're screwed, man. You got to pull all that ductwork out, put 2 furnaces in, one in the attic, one in the basement, 2 ACs. Otherwise, you never cool that place. Holy crap, I'm freaking out. So I get some load calc software. I put all the data in because I obviously have all the data because I just had the house built, right? It's a track house. It's nothing overly sexy, but I got the blueprints. I got the insulation values. I punch all that stuff in. 39,000 BTUs. That was my load calc, 39,000 BTUs. For those of you guys don't know, 12,000 BTUs per ton. Okay, great. So I should have had a 3 1/4 ton unit. They don't make a 3 1/4, so you got to pick either a 3 or a 3 1/2. Most of you guys would have rounded it up to a 3 1/2 or even a 4 in some cases. I actually rounded down to the 3 ton. I kind of knew about this dehumidification thing. I knew about the oversizing problem a little bit back then, 18 years ago. So I rounded down. I put the 3 ton in on my 3 1/4 ton load. Guess what happened on the hottest day of the year for what I had that unit for? 14, 15 years I had that unit before I put in the newer system. The hottest day that I've ever had was like 100-ish degrees. Guess what still happened on a 100-degree day with my 3-ton unit that should have been undersized for a 90-degree day? Yep, it cycled. I'm like, how could it cycle? I did the perfect load calc. Still too big because all the data that's in the software tools also causes the oversizing. Lots of factors cause this oversizing. So if I would have put the 5-ton in, I would have had some pretty bad humidity problems for sure. The number one reason why you guys oversize air conditioners, I'm saying you guys, I'm sure there's somebody on this call that doesn't do it, but most of you are saying you don't do it and you probably actually do, right? So the biggest fear you have is that it's going to be too small on some kind of 97-degree day or whatever, and your customer is going to actually call you out on that. That's your biggest fear. If you do the proper load calc and do not cheat and do not round up, you're still going to have too much cooling. You're still going to have plenty for the 97-degree freaky day. Every job that I've looked at has been this way. There's so much ample flexibility there. Sometimes you guys don't have the info. On an existing house, you might not know the R value. You don't know what the infiltration is. You don't know how good the windows are, so you're forced to guess. And when you guys guess, you guess conservative. And I get it, right? I don't know the answer. I'm going to guess a little conservative. Okay, I get it. But what I don't want you to do is guess conservative on all the input values to your software calc and then get the answer and round up even more. You're compounding the problem when you do that. Do not round up the inputs and round up the output of the software. That's too much safety factor. It's causing you to have 50 to 100% safety factor. Stop putting on safety factors. Don't put them on the inputs. Don't put them on the outputs. Do the entire load calc with the most perfect information you can have and guess at as minimal things as possible. And if you have to guess, round down. Then see what the answer is. Then if you want to put in a slightly bigger unit because you got this perfect answer, maybe you would do that. I still wouldn't do it, but maybe. But don't put a bunch of safe numbers in, safety factor inflated numbers in, then get the answer and then round up anyway. You're doubling up on your safety factor. The software tools that we all use, they make a lot of assumptions. If you've ever done done a load calculation by hand, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And when you're doing these ones with the software tools, you're putting in like half the amount of data, sometimes even less. We got one software tool, you can do a load calc in 1 minute, like legitimately 1 minute load calc. It's making a bunch of guesses for you. Okay, that's nice because it sped it up. But those guesses are all conservative. So the manufacturers of the software, all of them, I'm not picking on anybody, every single software manufacturer has made some assumptions for you in the background, and they made those all safe. So those are getting inflated into that discussion. Some of you guys are not liking the answer you get from the load calc. So you're going back into the load calc, and you're changing the inputs until you actually get the answer that you wanted all along. Yeah, I think I need a 4-ton for this house. You do the load calc, it's 2.5. Like, that must be wrong. There's no way this is a 2.5-ton house. It's a 4-ton all day long. My grandpappy said it was 4 tons. It's got to be 4 tons. And you start changing the inputs. Well, if it's a little bit hotter outside? What if the customer wants it a little bit colder? What if their insulation sagged? You start changing all these inputs. What if they have more infiltration? You keep changing it until you get the answer you always wanted anyway. Why even do the load calc then? If you're already going to guess at it, just guess at it and be done with it, man. The equipment itself has safety factors in it. If we tell you a unit makes 34,000 BTUs, it probably makes 38. I'm not kidding. It probably does. The way AHRI works is they do not test the manufacturer's equipment. They don't test it. The manufacturers do not test the equipment either. That makes no sense. It's test data. Yeah, they spot test some stuff. But for example, like Carrier, there's over 1 million combinations in the AHRI database. They're not testing 1 million units. That's ridiculous to think that they are. They're calculating this stuff. They're testing some stuff and using that test data to calculate the other stuff. The way AHRI works is the manufacturers send their data to AHRI and they get listed on the website and life is good. And then AHRI has them spot test some of the things. Hey, you got to test this, 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 and that. And they send those things in to get tested. And if those things are within 5%, no problem. Your test was 5% of what you said on the stated data, you're fine. But if it's not within 5%, then it's hand slapping time. What does that mean? Well, that means we're going to start testing more of your stuff because you guys are cheating. So what the manufacturers do is they put a little safety factor in there. If they know that unit can do 38,000 BTUs, they list it at 34,000 BTUs just to be safe. You start adding all these things up, and it's pretty easy to see how you can get double-sized. Literally double-sized. Most of these systems are way, 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 way too big. If you don't believe me, look at your customers that have Ecobee and stuff like that and see what's happening on those 90-some degree days and see if their thermostat's cycling on and off or it's not. If it's 90 degrees in Chicagoland and Wisconsin and Indiana and Michigan, if it's 90 degrees, your thermostat should call for cooling nonstop, without exception, the entire day, all 8 hours. That's what it should do. Because by definition, you sized it for 90 degrees. That's all it can handle. It should be nonstop the whole day, 8 hours straight without shutting off. If it's shutting off, it's oversized. And the more you see it shutting off, the more oversized it is. Some people might tell you, oh, it's supposed to cycle 4 to 6 times an hour. That's complete bullshit. I don't know where that came from. That's not a thing. I know that says that in some thermostat manuals and they have these cycle timer things. That's a bunch of crap. That thing needs to run balls out on a design day. Period. End of discussion. If you right size it, what are the benefits you're going to have? Code compliance. You may or may not care about code compliance, but that's one of the benefits. It's going to cost less. If I'm bidding a 3.5-ton unit and my competitor's bidding a 5-ton unit, who's going to have a lower price? Probably me. Now, the challenge is I have to convince the homeowner that they don't need the 5-ton. Their old one was 5 tons. The other 2 guys that bid 5 tons. Why the hell are you bidding a 3.5-ton? I've got to sit down with the homeowner and do the load calc with them to make them understand what's going into it. I'm going to put the inputs in, insulation and windows or whatever, while they're standing in front of me and say, yeah, you have R19 insulation. Oh, yeah, okay. And make them kind of like nod their head on each input that I throw in there. And then when the answer comes out, what are they going to argue about? Oh, no, it's not right. Well, what do you want me to change? Well, I don't know, right? You got to get them to buy in at the process, not just at the answer. Buying at the answer is pretty difficult. Smaller equipment typically is quieter equipment. Not always, but typically it's the quieter units. It's going to take up less yard space. Typically it's physically smaller. Customers are not going to complain if you're putting a smaller, visually smaller thing in their yard. It's probably going to be fine with them. Things aren't going to trip out as much. If your furnace is oversized and it's hitting high limit, that's not normal. Your furnace should never hit high limit. And I know someone's going to say, well, the ductwork's probably too small. Maybe it is. I'm not a believer that ductwork is too small. I think the ductwork in most houses in America is perfectly sized for the house. I think the air conditioner and furnace that someone attached to the ductwork is too big for the ductwork. So if you want to say ductwork's too small for the air conditioner and furnace, that's true. Don't solve it by putting bigger ductwork in. Solve it by putting a smaller furnace and a smaller air conditioner in. And then this stuff isn't going to trip out, at least not as much. The equipment will have a longer lifespan. What? Why would it have a longer lifespan? When you cycle things on and off, they die faster. That's why manufacturers of UV light bulbs for your evaporator coil tell you to power them continuously. Don't cycle them on and off. They know that cycling the light bulb on and off is going to wear it out faster. The same thing happens with the mechanical equipment and with gas burners and boilers and all these things, refrigerant systems. When I run my air conditioner or my furnace, it heats up and it cools down the metal in there. When metal heats up and cools down, it expands and contracts. The entire air conditioner is not made out of the exact same metals. There's dissimilar metals there. So they have different expansion and contraction rates. So if this thing attached to this thing expands and contracts at a different rate, eventually that thing's going to fatigue and it's going to break. I'd rather that take a longer time to happen. So the equipment will last longer if it runs longer cycles. If I run the whole day in an 8-hour time span, if I cycle on and off 10 times versus by cycling on and off 50 times, it's going to last longer on the 10 time. Energy cost is going to be lower. There's lower amp draw on the smaller compressor units, hence lower wattage, hence lower kilowatts, hence lower utility bill. Less temperature swings. If I can keep your unit on continuously as long as possible, it's going to be a constant discharge air temperature coming out of the grills, out of the registers, so I'm going to have more even temperature in the actual space. Dehumidification is going to be phenomenally improved. No doubt about that. That's what we talked about at the beginning of this discussion. The longer I run, the more I dehumidify. And then guess what happens? The more I dehumidify, the more comfortable I am. Then guess what happens? I have to bump my thermostat set point up. I no longer need it to be 71 to be comfortable. Now I need 73 or 75, or in my case, 77. If I get the dehumidification under control, the temperature I need goes up, which helps justify my small air conditioner again. So I mentioned load calcs in 1 minute, and we actually are doing some live demos of this on Wednesday if you're interested. We use this software tool from EDS. We call it Gizmo. It's a long story on how we evolved to that name, which is for a different day, but that's what we call it here. This guy will do a load calc in literally 1 minute. All I did in this scenario, all I did was put in the address. In this case, my house's address. I put my address in, and then I hit submit. That's it. It tells me I need 46,000 BTUs cooling, 88,000 BTUs heating. At the time that I did that, my house didn't have a cooling, and I had a 100,000 BTU furnace. By taking 5 minutes instead of 1 minute, I can go into that calculation more deeply and tweak some of the insulation values and other things that I know about the house and get a slightly more accurate answer to that discussion. In this case, I went and put all the values that I have in, and I was able to get down to 33,000 BTUs. Originally, when I did it, I had 39,000 BTUs, and that's how I sized my first air conditioner. But as I learned more about the house and as I changed things in my house, I'm able to get even tighter guesses on there. And if I did this again now, today, I probably would be under 30,000 BTUs cooling, and I'd probably be under 40,000 BTUs heating. The furnace I have in my house now, I took 100,000 BTU out, and I put a 60,000 BTU in. It's 98% efficient, so it's like 58 or 59,000 BTUs output. On polar vortex day, minus 26 degrees, my furnace still was slightly too big. How do I know? Because it didn't run the whole day for 12 hours. It actually cycled on and off a couple times in that time frame. Actually, in my case, it doesn't cycle. I have a modulating gas valve. It goes from 40 to 100% in 1% increments. So it doesn't shut off. It just kind of goes up and down, if you will. But the first time it ever hit 100% fire rate was that polar vortex day. And it didn't stay at 100. It actually came back down after a while. So I could probably put an even smaller furnace in. But it started out with 100,000, which is what the builder gave me. And my friend said it wouldn't heat it. My HVAC friend said it wouldn't be able to heat the house. And if I had put the 5-ton air conditioner in, that would have been ridiculous. I have a 5-stage 3-ton right now. So 36,000 BTUs, 5 tons. It can ramp down to 9,000 BTUs on the low end of my air conditioner. And that thing pretty much runs those 5 stages all summer long. Like, it almost never shuts off. It just ramps down. It's quite beautiful, actually. But if I can make a little bit more effort, 5 minutes, we'll show you how to do that on Wednesday if you're interested. I get a more perfect load calc. And they're just showing you some of the inputs that you can stick into this, which we'll do on another day. All right, so let me look at a few of your questions real quick, and then I'm going to give you a couple of times to tell you when it's okay to oversize, and then I'm going to wrap this up here. A couple people suggested on a 3-ton load, this is my house, I think, to put a 3.5-ton evaporator coil. We did do that a lot. When I started here in the 90s, everybody, literally everybody at my office and every dealer always put in a coil that was a half size bigger than the condensing unit. And that was for the purpose of getting more surface area, to get more heat transfer, and to get a better sensible heat latent ratio. That's true. What happened in 2006 is all the manufacturers eventually figured out we were all putting in the bigger coils. And they just finally said, you know what? We're done with that. Like, I don't know why we're having to make you put in an 042 coil on an 036 condensing unit. Why don't we just call the 042 coil? Let's just call it an 036, 36,000 BTUs. So in 2006, the manufacturers changed how they rate the coils, and what was a half size big is now called the smaller size. So that's one of the reasons why we typically don't go up on the evaporator coils anymore. Some guys still do, and you can get even more dehumidification that way, but there's a diminishing return to that discussion. JP says, on a 90-degree day, if the AC is running the whole day, is that more or less energy used than if it is on 70% of the time cycling on and off? Excellent question, JP. Typically, it's going to be lower energy. What? How could that be? It runs all day and it's lower energy? Yeah, that's typically actually what happens. Now, the amount of BTUs your house needs, as a general statement, is a function of the load of calculation of the house. The example I would typically give someone, let's say you got a gardener friend, or it's even you like to garden. Let's say your garden needs 5 gallons of water a day for your little garden. You could either get one of those soaker hoses with a little perforated holes in it, turn on your spigot, let 5 gallons spray out onto your garden, or you can walk up to it with a 5-gallon bucket and just dump that thing on there. Either way, it's the same 5 gallons of water you bought. The sprinkler hose metered it out in a slow fashion, which was perfect for the garden. The 5-gallon bucket, I dumped it on there, half of it ran off, it was sloppily wasted away. I still bought the same 5 gallons. I paid 5 gallons of water, but I didn't get to fully use the 5 gallons correctly. Same thing happens with your air conditioner or your furnace. I'm buying X amount of energy from the utility. If I'm able to meter it out slowly, I'm going to have much more comfort in there. When I have a modulating air conditioner, it's typically going to be inverter driven as well. So when it's inverter driven, I can stage it downward. Staging it downward allows the compressor to use less energy while taking full advantage of the surface area of the condenser coil and full advantage of the surface area of the evaporator coil. When I ramp any device up, boiler, furnace, air conditioner, whatever, I ramp it up to maximum capacity, I'm fully stuck with the size of the heat exchange surface area that I have. Every single thing at high fire is less efficient than the exact same thing at low fire. Every 2-stage furnace is more efficient on first stage. Every 2-stage air conditioner is more efficient on first stage. It's always more efficient the lower you go. Even like a chiller plant. You put 2 chillers in, we typically don't ramp one up to 100% before we kick the other one on. When that first one gets up to like 70%, we say, okay, that's cool. We drop him down to 35, turn the other dude down at 35, and then ramp them up together. 2 chillers at 35% is typically going to be more efficient than 1 chiller at 70%. Same thing with the boiler plant. Great question, JP. All right. There's a few times when I'm going to tell you it's okay to oversize. Very few. This is a short list. All right. Ductwork. If you want to oversize your ductwork, okay. You can oversize it a little bit. I'm not saying you put in 10 tons of ductwork on a 2-ton system, but if you want to put 3 tons of ductwork in on a 2-ton system, that's not going to be any major penalty to anybody. In fact, it'll probably help you out a little bit with the fan energy, because it'll be less restrictive on the duct, less snug down, right? Imagine blowing air through a fat straw versus a little tiny coffee stirrer straw, right? The same amount of air to blow through the coffee straw takes a lot of pressure to do that. So ductwork being oversized a little bit is okay. Filtration, it's okay to oversize the filter. You want to put a little bit bigger filter in, even bigger than opening the furnace. Oh, I got a 16-inch wide opening on the furnace. Great, put a 20-inch wide filter rack in there. The slower the air goes to the filter, the better off you're going to be as far as filtration goes. I'm okay with the filter being oversized a little bit. If you have a heat pump and it is inverter driven, I'm okay with you oversizing, rounding up to the next size. So what does that mean? If you got a heat pump, your system for cooling and heating is the same exact system, right? So I have to choose whether I'm going to size it for heating or cooling. Now in the Midwest here where we're at, if we size it for cooling, we get gypped on the heating. We don't have enough. In which case, auxiliary heat has to be used to get the rest of the way. If I size it for heating, it'd be really grossly oversized. I would have to put in an 8-ton air conditioner for my house that only needs 3 tons, right? It would get a little bit crazy. So that would cause me dehumidification problems. But if you have an inverter, you have the ability to ramp down a little bit, right? You turn down a little bit. Actually, you have the ability to ramp down a lot on a design day. But here's your design day. Here's your low load day. And here's how far my compressor can ramp down. So on a low load day, I still got a little bit of ability to ramp down. So if you have a heat pump and you want to get a little bit more heat out of it, so you use less auxiliary electric heat, and the heat pump is inverter driven with lots of stages, then I'm cool with you oversizing it a little bit. We do that pretty common with inverters. If you have a 3-ton load, we might tell you to round it up to the 4-ton. We won't tell you to round up to the 5, we'll tell you to round up to the 4. Piping systems, if you want to oversize those a little bit, whether it's chilled water, hot water, domestic water, a little bit, you want to round up a half size, I'm cool with that. If you listen to Mike Smith's webinar last week on the series counterflow 23XRV screw chillers, there can be some advantages to upsizing them a little bit. Once again, you're not going to put in a 550-ton chiller on a 100-ton load, but if you want to oversize a little bit, listen to Mike's webinar we recorded and you'll understand that. Hydronic systems, you want to put a bigger expansion tank, as my man Bill Bailey will tell you, put in as big a damn tank as you want. Expansion's stupid, it don't care. It's fine. Now, the bigger the tank, the more expensive it is, so you don't want to oversize it too crazy. If you want to round up on a hydronic expansion tank, go ahead. Same thing with radiators. Want to put a little bit big radiator? That's okay. Now, don't put in a 40,000 BTU radiator when you need 20,000. But if you want to put in a 25 rating to 20, okay, that's actually cool. And it actually can help you keep a lower supplier temperature on the boiler, which then helps you save energy as well. But only do that if the radiators have their own independent control valves. Otherwise, if you do that, you're going to get too much heat in that zone relative to the other zones. So they got to be independently controlled if you want to bump them up a little bit. And then if you have tanked water heaters, only tanked. If you have tankless, do not oversize it. Oversizing tankless is a problem because you're going to have to get to a higher flow rate for it to energize the pressure switch, which means you might not be able to get it to turn on with all your faucets, or with only one of your faucets rather. But on a tanked water heater, no big deal. They're pretty well insulated. If you want to buffer 60 gallons instead of buffering 40 gallons, fine. It's not that big of a deal. I'm okay with that a little bit. All right, see if we have any more questions on here. Oh, okay, Terry has an interesting point. Another potential reason to oversize the evaporator would be to obtain a lower airside pressure drop, as long as the combination will satisfy the sensible latent loads. That is absolutely true, Terry. So what he's telling you there, that was going back to our discussion. He probably wrote that when we were talking about the putting a 3.5-ton evaporator coil on a 3-ton condensing unit. He's going back to that discussion. Typically, that'll give you a larger width or larger gaps in the coil or taller, something like that to get that thing a little bit more airflow forgiving, if you will. And that will, in fact, give you, in some cases, a higher sear rating. When you look at the AHRI combinations, you might get a little bit higher sear rating because of that airflow benefit. And it might mean your fan can run a little bit lower. So you could do that half a size tops. But I'm okay with that, Terry. I agree with you. All right, so we got a question from Paul. How much do you think the fan in the on versus auto for residential help with comfort? All right, so here's my thoughts on that. It's a little bit outside our discussion, but we'll do it anyway. Here's my thoughts on that. And I've looked at it quite a bit in my own house as well. It's actually, believe it or not, again, Ecobee data on there. And I can send you guys data on that as well. So there's two schools of thought. One, run the fan in the on position to A, get better air circulation in the home, B, to get better filtration. No question on the filtration. If you're not running the fan, the filter is not doing anything. The better circulation is highly debatable for the fact that the rooms that you're struggling to heat and cool, they probably have bad duct distribution to begin with. So me running the fan more doesn't help them that much. If that room needs 150 CFM and I'm only able to get 110 in and out, it's not that much benefit to me. Balancing the system and fixing the ductwork would be a better benefit. But there is a slight benefit to running the fan in that regard. Here's the negative side of that. One, it's going to take more energy to run the fan continuously than to turn it on and off. Even if you have a variable speed fan, it'll still be more energy than if you cycled it on and off. Two, if your ductwork is leaky, and especially if it's leaky in a semi-conditioned or unconditioned space like an attic or crawl space, that leaky ductwork is going to suck in that air. So let's say it goes through your attic and it's 95 degrees outside, so your attic is easily 95 degrees also, it's sucking 95 degrees in those cracks. Ductwork typically is 20 to 35% leaky. We did a webinar on aerial seal duct sealing last Wednesday. Go ahead and watch that one if you guys want, kind of get some insight on that. But it sucks that air into the leaks, and now I have more load on the system because I sucked in your attic air or your crawl space air or whatever it was. So if your ductwork is sealed tight and you have a good filtering system, you may want to consider running your fan in the on position. Honestly, at my house, normally I run my fan in auto. It still runs a good chunk of the time because in the summer and winter, my AC and my furnace don't even shut off. They just run and they just kind of modulate up and down. So it doesn't really make a difference there. And then in the spring and fall, I typically turn it off anyway and open the windows. So it's not a big deal there. But I do run mine in the auto position. The only time I run my fan in the on position is when someone is sick at my house. If somebody's sick, I run in the on position to get better filtration and to have my my PCO Respicare Oxy 4 air purifier do more work that way. Right now, for the past 2 weeks, I also have in the on position. No one's sick in my house, but I'm really trying to make sure that doesn't happen. So we got that airflow running more than we normally would as well. Harley says, modulating furnace lockout adjustments for 70,000 BTU needs. Our stats will do it, but should we? I'm not sure exactly what he's saying. I think he's saying if you have a modulating furnace, should you limit it? And we can do that on some of this equipment. Like if we have a Evolution Bryant thermostat, Carrier Infinity, or a Heil ion thermostat, day and night ion thermostat, we have the ability to go in there on the modulating gas valve systems and maximize or limit the maximum heating capacity. So if you were to have put in a 80,000 BTU furnace, we could limit it down so it's only going to be, say, a 70,000 BTU furnace and not use the rest of that energy no matter what happens. Now, the problem with that, let me see if I can get a little pen out, and hopefully you guys can see this. So the problem with that, let's say I have, that's not a pen, what is that? I did click on pen. Come on, man. We'll try it one more time. See if I can draw on the screen here. What the heck? I used to be John Madden back in the day, but now I suck. One more time here. Pen option. Okay, hopefully you can see that. It's a really bad drawing, but hopefully you can see that. So let's suppose that's my maximum capacity, 100%. That guy can turn down so far. So in the case of a modulating gas furnace, let's say it's a 100,000 BTU furnace, he can actually turn down to 40,000 BTUs. But if I put in the 120,000 BTU furnace, 120, and 40% of that would be 48,000 BTUs. So there are some people that'll say, hey, dude, just put in the big furnace all the time and then have the stat limit it down. The problem with that is if I put the 120 in when I only needed 100, assuming my 100 was correct, I probably wasn't. I probably needed a 60. But I thought I needed 100. I put in the 120. He can only ramp down to 48. That means if it's below 48, he has to cycle off and on again like he would have otherwise had to do. So you don't want to go with a bigger furnace or the bigger air conditioner and then rely on the variable speed compressor or modulating gas valve to clean up the mess. Put in the right size unit and then let the modulation take you all the way down to the absolute low end that you would ever need, and that's going to be the most perfect scenario for comfort. Do not oversize because you are going to rely on controls to help band-aid your problem. They can, but why bother? Just size correctly and then let the controls do their job. And I am just realizing I am like a full half an hour past when I said I was going to end this webinar. So I apologize for that. With that, I'm going to get another beer and finish this guy off. And thank y'all for joining us.